They say secrets always find a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply you try to bury them. I never believed that until the day my world unraveled with a single knock on the door. It wasn't a stranger standing there, it was my son, face flushed, his fists clenched at his sides, holding my phone like it was evidence in a trial. "I know, Mom," he said, his voice trembling, a mixture of anger and heartbreak lacing his words. The room seemed to tilt as his gaze bore into mine. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. I didn't know what he knew, or how, but I knew in that moment, nothing would ever be the same again. How do you explain the unexplainable to the person who trusts you most? How do you justify betraying not only your vows, but your own child's belief in who you are? My name is Laura, and for the past 16 years, I've worn many hats: wife, mother, teacher, friend. But if you had asked anyone to define me, they'd simply say, "She's a good woman." It's a description I wore like a badge of honor, until I let it slip through my fingers. My husband, David, and I had been married for nearly 2 decades. We met in college, where his easy smile and endless optimism swept me off my feet. He wasn't just my husband, he was my rock, the dependable one who made sure our life had stability. Together, we built a home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, complete with a neatly mowed lawn, a dog named Charlie, and Sunday dinners at the table. It was the kind of life that looked perfect from the outside, but inside, the cracks had been forming for years. Our son Ethan was the light of my life, a lanky 16-year-old with his father's brown eyes and my stubborn streak. Ethan had always been a curious and compassionate kid, the type who'd pause a video game to check on me if I looked tired. In many ways, I lived for him. But as he grew older, I noticed how he started pulling away, his headphones on more often, his door closed longer. I told myself it was just teenage rebellion, but deep down, I feared it was something I'd done, or hadn't done. Our family's routine revolved around predictability: weekday school runs, weekends spent cleaning, the occasional family movie night. But predictability breeds monotony, and monotony creates distance. David and I had stopped talking about the things that mattered. Conversations were surface level, about bills, schedules, or Ethan's grades. Somewhere along the way, the spark that once defined us flickered out. I remember the first time I met him, Michael. He came into my life like a storm, unexpected and electrifying. He was the new science teacher at Ethan's school, younger than me by a few years, with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Our interactions started innocently enough, quick chats in the school hallway or during parent-teacher meetings. But soon, those chats turned into lingering glances, then stolen moments, and eventually, a secret that I knew could destroy everything I had built. It wasn't love, not really. It was an escape, a way to feel seen again, to remember what it was like to be desired. But I told myself I could keep it separate, hidden. No one had to know. Until Ethan found out. The moment Ethan said, "I know, Mom," it felt like the walls of my carefully constructed world collapsed inward. My breath hitched as I stared at him, trying to decipher what he meant, how much he knew. "Ethan," my voice cracked and I reached for him, but he stepped back, his grip tightening on my phone. "Don't," he said sharply, his voice louder than I'd ever heard it. "Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about." His hands trembled as he thrust the phone toward me, the screen glaring with damning evidence, a string of texts between Michael and me. Words I could never take back, words that painted me as someone I didn't recognize. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Ethan, I can explain." "Explain." His laugh was bitter, foreign, like it didn't belong to my son. "You've been lying. To Dad. To me. I trusted you, Mom. How could you do this?" My stomach churned as his words pierced through me, each one heavier than the last. I opened my mouth to respond, but what could I say? That it wasn't what it looked like? That I'd somehow justified it to myself? None of it mattered now, not in the face of his betrayal, his heartbreak. "Ethan, listen," I pleaded, stepping closer, but he backed away again, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I made a mistake, okay? A mistake," he interrupted, his voice cracking. "How long, Mom? How long have you been doing this?" I hesitated, and in that pause, I saw his face harden, the last shred of trust crumbling before my eyes. "Ethan, it's complicated," I said, my voice trembling. "Your dad and we've been struggling. It's not an excuse, but I need you to understand." "Struggling," he snapped, his fists clenching. "So what? You cheat instead of fixing things? That's how you fix it?" The air between us was suffocating, thick with tension and words neither of us knew how to say. In my mind, I was screaming at myself, berating every decision that had led to this moment. "You're a terrible mother, Laura. How could you let it come to this?" But Ethan wasn't done. He pressed on, his voice rising. "Do you even care about what this does to Dad? To me? Or was it all just about you?" The question hit me like a blow. Of course I cared. I had told myself 100 times that I could compartmentalize, that my choices wouldn't touch my family. But standing there, with my son looking at me like I was a stranger, I realized how deluded I had been. "Ethan, please," I begged, tears spilling down my cheeks. "I love you. I love your dad." Don't," he shouted, his voice breaking. "Don't say you love us when you've been lying this whole time. Love doesn't look like this, Mom." His words sliced through me, leaving me gasping for air. He turned his back to me, running his hands through his hair in frustration. For a moment, there was only silence, broken only by the sound of my uneven breaths. "I can't believe you," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "I thought you were better than this." "Ethan," I said softly, my voice barely audible. "I am better than this. I made a mistake, but it doesn't change how much I love you. How much I love your dad." He turned to face me again, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a mix of anger and pain. "Does Dad know?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "No," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "He doesn't." Ethan's face twisted in disbelief. "So, you're just going to keep lying to him? To all of us?" "I don't know," I confessed, the weight of my guilt threatening to crush me. "I don't know what to do." For the first time, Ethan's expression softened, but it wasn't sympathy, it was disappointment. "You should have thought about that before you did this," he said quietly. The words hung between us, final and unforgiving. I wanted to reach out, to hold him, to tell him I was sorry, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. Nothing would be enough. Ethan stared at me for a long moment, his jaw clenched, before he turned and walked out of the room. The sound of his bedroom door slamming echoed through the house, leaving me alone with the silence, and the mess I'd made. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands, as waves of regret crashed over me. I had failed as a wife, as a mother, as the person Ethan believed I was. And now, the fragile thread holding our family together felt like it was about to snap. For the first time, I realized that no matter how much I tried to control the fallout, I was no longer the one holding the reins. My son knew the truth, and nothing I did could change that. The only question left was whether our family could survive the wreckage, or if it was already too late. The night before the confrontation, I had been texting Michael, laughing at something he said, when I noticed Ethan's shadow in the hallway. I brushed it off, not realizing that my son, my perceptive too smart for his own good son, had seen more than I wanted him to. The house was quiet the next morning, but it wasn't the usual peaceful quiet. It was the kind of silence that comes after something irreparable has been broken. Ethan hadn't come down for breakfast, and I couldn't bring myself to call him. David had already left for work, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within our walls. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee as it grew cold. My phone was face down beside me, Michael's name glowing faintly in my mind. I hadn't responded to his last message, and now I wasn't sure if I ever would. When Ethan finally came downstairs, he didn't look at me. His backpack was slung over his shoulder, and his face was set in a mask of detachment. "Ethan, can we talk?" I asked softly, my voice fragile. He hesitated at the door, his hand resting on the knob. For a moment, I thought he'd walk out without a word. But then he turned to face me, his eyes filled with a tired kind of anger. "What's there to talk about?" he asked flatly. "Everything," I said, standing up. "I know I've hurt you, and You don't get it, Mom," he interrupted, his voice trembling. "It's not just about what you did. It's about who you are." The words hit me harder than I expected. I took a step closer, but he held up a hand to stop me. "You were the one person I thought I could always count on," he continued, his voice rising. "You told me to be honest, to do the right thing, to take responsibility for my actions. And now I don't even know who you are." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Ethan, I'm still your mom. I've made mistakes, but I'm still the same person who loves you more than anything." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "The same person? The same person who's been lying to Dad's face? The same person who snuck around behind his back?" Ethan, it's complicated. Stop saying that, he shouted, his voice cracking. It's not complicated. You cheated. You lied. You broke everything. His words hung in the air, sharp and unrelenting. I opened my mouth to respond, but the sound of the front door opening made me freeze. David stepped inside, his briefcase in hand, his face lighting up briefly before his eyes darted between Ethan and me. The tension in the room was palpable. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice cautious. Neither of us answered. Ethan's jaw tightened, and I felt my heart race. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading. "Ethan," David said, his tone firmer now. "What's going on?" Ethan turned to me, his eyes burning with unspoken words. For a second, I thought he wouldn't say anything. But then he looked at David, his face crumpling with the weight of the truth. "Ask Mom," he said, his voice hollow. "She's the one who's been keeping secrets." David's brows furrowed as he turned to me. "What's he talking about?" My breath caught in my throat. The walls seemed to close in, the air too thick to breathe. I tried to find the words, but nothing felt sufficient. "David, my voice faltered. "There's something I need to tell you." His expression shifted, confusion giving way to concern. "What is it?" I swallowed hard, my hands trembling. I've been seeing someone else." The words left my mouth like a heavy stone, sinking into the silence. For a moment, everything was still. Then David's face paled, his grip tightening on his briefcase. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Ethan's gaze dropped to the floor, and I saw his hands clench into fists. "I told you, Dad. She's been lying to you." David turned to me, his eyes wide with shock and hurt. "Is this true? Laura, tell me this isn't true." Tears streamed down my face as I nodded. "It's true. But it's not what you think. I didn't mean for it to happen, You just what?" he snapped, his voice breaking. "You just decided our family didn't matter? That I didn't matter?" "No." I cried. "It wasn't like that. But the words died in my throat as I saw the devastation on his face. The man who had stood by me for 20 years, who had trusted me, now looked at me like I was a stranger. "I thought we were happy," he said quietly, more to himself than to me. "I thought we had a life." "We do," I whispered, my voice desperate. "We can fix this. Please, David, I'm so sorry." But he shook his head, his expression hardening. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught." His words hit like a slap, and I flinched. Ethan turned away, his shoulders hunched, as if the weight of it all was too much for him to bear. "I need some air," David muttered, his voice tight. He turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my choices. Ethan followed a moment later, but not before giving me one last look, a look that said everything he couldn't. And then I was alone, the house eerily silent once again. This time though, it wasn't just silence. It was the sound of everything I had built crumbling into dust. That evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chairs where my family used to sit. The laughter, the small arguments over who got the last piece of pie, the comfort of simply being together, all of it felt so far away now. The silence wasn't just around me, it was inside me, pressing down with the weight of everything I had lost. David didn't come home that night. Ethan locked himself in his room. I knew better than to knock, so I let him have his space, even though it felt like another piece of my heart breaking. I spent the hours replaying the past few months in my mind, searching for the moment it all went wrong. Maybe it wasn't one moment. Maybe it was the slow erosion of connection, the little cracks we ignored until they became fault lines. I had convinced myself that I deserved to feel something again, to escape the numbness, but in chasing that fleeting feeling, I had destroyed the people I loved most. By the time dawn broke, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about fixing things overnight or... He didn't look at me. "Sorry doesn't fix it," he muttered, but his voice lacked the sharp edge it had the day before. "I know," I said, my voice soft but steady. "But I'm going to try to make this right, even if it takes the rest of my life." Ethan's shoulders sagged, and for a moment, he looked like a little boy again, hurt, confused, and wanting so badly to understand. "You hurt us, Mom," he whispered. "I know," I said, my voice cracking. "And I'll never stop being sorry for that." That night, David came home. He didn't speak much, just nodded when I said we needed to talk soon. The pain in his eyes was raw, but there was also something else, resolve. Whether that meant we'd stay together or not, I didn't know. As I lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling, I thought about how love wasn't always about passion or grand gestures. It was about the quiet, steady work of showing up for each other every day. And somewhere along the way, I had stopped showing up. I don't know what the future holds for us. Maybe David will forgive me, or maybe he won't. Maybe Ethan will see me as more than my mistakes, or maybe that trust is gone for good. But I do know this: the people we love deserve our honesty, our effort, and our presence. And no matter how far we stray, there's always a way back, if we're willing to do the work to rebuild what's been broken. Sometimes, the hardest part isn't asking for forgiveness,